go with our presentation here. With a quorum of members present and the posted time having arrived, I will call the Finance Committee Budget Session Number 1 to order. Today is Thursday, October 14th, 2021, and today is kind of an exciting time every year. This kicks off our 2022 budget process, and I guess for those of us that find budget things exciting, this is a kind of a big day. Always in our first session, we have a presentation from the finance director, and we talk about where we're at and what our cost to continue looks like, where we will provide the things that we have provided all along without new spending, just to see where, as a point of beginning. And so we won't decide tonight really what to add and what to take out, but next week we have 2 meetings, 2 workshops, the 20th and the 21st. And that is really where we dive into the meat of like building the 2022 budget, figuring out what to include and what to not include. So for people who are following this process at home and online, the 2 meetings next week are definitely 2 that you want to watch. And then the following week, we'll have probably a 3rd session where we'll even dig into it further. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mary Ann and she can get us going.
Thank you. So I've been doing the budget for a long time, and this is probably the weirdest year ever. So I have some, pieces of information that we've really never had to manage before. So I'm going to carefully go through them, but I really want everyone to be able to understand. So if you have any questions, there is no such thing as a dumb question, and we'll start. So. We have at, you can do the next slide. Yeah, so as always, we have a lot of things that influence the budget. Historically, one of our long-term standing problems is flat revenues, where our revenues do not keep pace with our expenses. Again, that continues to be a problem. This year, perhaps a little bit more than past years because we're still digging out from under the effects of the pandemic. And obviously, interest rates, the interest rate environment is substantially less than it was in prior years. So flat revenues are, not helping us. From an expense standpoint, we did get bad news from our health insurance consultant. We had gone out for bids, I guess, for quotes on insurance, and we had gotten a 2-year quote from We at Trust 2 years ago, and they had provided us with very competitive bids, and that really helped us keep our health insurance costs down. We have not had good experience the last couple of years, and so it made us going to market difficult because of our experience. So we were able to finally negotiate insurance at an 8.8% rate, which we felt lucky to get. So the budget does have that 8.8% increase. We do have union contracts that we're in the midst of. I believe both police and fire will be done at the end of 2022. So this would be the last year of those contracts. Every year, people qualify to move up in the salary step progression. So those salary step progressions are built into the budget, as is that final option 3 implementation. If you recall, when we implemented the salary study back in 2019 for affordability, those people who had a lot of seniority were put in lower in the pay scale than their seniority actually would have justified. And so last year we gave them an extra bump, and this year it would be the final implementation, which would bring them to where they belong in the seniority scale. So that is built into the numbers that you're going to see. We did experience increases in the Wisconsin retirement rate for our police and fire. That is built in. And then 2% CPI for non-represented employees at January 1 is built in. So that's what's in the sauce. The other thing that's in the sauce is cybersecurity preventive measures through CCITC. I think everybody is aware that cybersecurity has become a more important thing, and people are experiencing hacks and attacks on a regular basis. And so we really need to step up our security game. And so we have CCITC submitted in their budget cybersecurity, and that is in there. The other thing that we experience, and this is the weirdness part, is, every time we have, I really am not a fan of revalves because it always kind of creates turmoil in our equalized value. So if you recall, our local assessor assesses each individual parcel in the city, residential and commercial. The state assesses each manufacturer. So they're looking at that individual parcel and determining what they think the value is. Then we are what we call a dual value state. The state of Wisconsin Department of Revenue then takes our values and equates them to an equalized value, which is supposed to reflect fair market value. But they're not looking at individual parcels. They're taking our entire population of parcels and applying what they think our total value is for the city. And they determine that by looking at sales data and other information that's provided to them. When we have a revaluation, usually many of the reports that we would typically provide to the Department of Revenue aren't ready at their due date because we're working on that revaluation, and that has us kind of backlogged a little bit. So estimates are used. So this is what causes these problems with equalized value, because last year the state was using our estimated, and they were kind of working in the dark a little bit on guessing how we compared to fair market value and coming up with our equalized value as a whole. State law then says the next year, if they now come to realize that those values were not accurate, they have to do corrections. And the corrections on your regular parcels is a 2-year correction. On a tax increment district, it's a 1-year correction. So we this year saw a large decrease in our overall value. So our overall value for the city went down, and we saw a very large increase in our tax increment district values. And that both of those had a lot to do with corrections. And so that has made a huge impact on our budget this year. What's not yet in the budget, and we'll kind of go into this further, but we had a structural deficit in the budget as we, after I'd gotten done reviewing everybody's budget and making sure that it, accurately reflected our needs. We had a $560,000 shortfall. So in talking to the mayor, we decided, those $560,000 is all in the non-personnel section of the budget, and it's related to, inflationary increases the department would put in a line item. So let's say, they think that medical supplies are going to go up 4%. Okay, that would be in this increase. Contractual obligations, if you have a contract that has a 2% inflation. Service demands, and just general needs of the department. So what we decided to do to get rid of this shortfall is to basically take the department's budgets and bring them back to just their non-personnel budgets, so the line items for supplies and those kinds of things, and bring them back down to their 2021 budget. And that basically eliminated that gap. Then, what we'd like to do is, and what we requested the departments to do, is to, once we had done that, for them to look through those needs and decide what they really needed. You know, like, could they get by with a little bit extra or less money? And then we had them categorize them into these different buckets so that we would know, like, what is a contractual obligation. Obviously, if we have a contract with somebody, that's something that we need to fulfill. And our goal then is, once we get a handle and we get some feedback from the committee, we can look at whether we want to add some of those things back, and we'll be able to prioritize the add backs. So this $560,000 structural imbalance has now been eliminated because we moved all of this out of the non-personnel budgets. The other thing that's not yet in the budget is we've been going through and getting feedback, just like businesses all over, that, you know, there's a lot of pressure for employees. People are leaving the workforce. They're looking for greener pasture. And so we've been getting a lot of feedback that our salary schedule needs to be changed. So HR, at their last meeting, made a couple of recommendations to try to improve the salary ranges. One is more of a recruiting tool, and that is, you know, today we have either a 18 or 22, I think it is, pay step, depending on where you are in the scale. They basically recommended suspending steps 1 and 2 so that people would automatically start at step 3. And anyone who works for us today who's in step 1 or 2 would get immediately moved up to step 3 to try to recognize that salaries are increasing and that competition for those employees is very competitive. The other thing that they recommended that we do is, when you are below midpoint, that, you know, today you get a step increase once every 12 months. They would give a step increase for these people who are not yet at midpoint every 6 months. So basically, they would be progressing through the pay scale faster. And that is not in this budget yet. The other thing that's not in this budget is, one of the things that they're contemplating is perhaps giving a one-time bonus, a non-base building bonus. That is not in this budget. So those are other things that we will need to consider. So I'd like to really start focusing on what has occurred with our value. So if we look at this, just to kind of give you an idea, you know, you can see that last year, our equalized, which was our fair market value, the state estimated was going up 8.76%. Oh, what's wrong? Oh, the WebEx isn't working? That's on your computer. Oh, do you think she means that she just can't see the screens?
She says it's not working.
Because I forget, you know, like, once we got this, I should have shared my screen.
Okay, we're going to take a quick pause in the
sorry.
presentation to determine if WebEx is actually functional for the public.
Where's the AV guy? No. Oops.
Or just to be there in person.
So. Oh, maybe you got out of there.
What's flashing at the bottom? See where it's
Oh, yeah.
next to the Outlook, is that it?
Is it?
I don't know.
What did that say?
That says share. Share or cancel. Okay, there's Jamie now, up in the corner.
I know with the water commission this afternoon, the sound was better under YouTube, so I just watched it on YouTube.
Can you ask her if she can see my screen now?
Okay, let's just do a quick test. Jamie Polly is on WebEx. Jamie, can you see Mary Ann's presentation? And can you hear us here in the council chamber? We'll unmute Jamie. Jamie, can you hear us in the council chamber? And can you see the presentation on PowerPoint?
No, I can only understand it live. Oh, you can hear me?
Show active speaker.
I unmuted Jamie.
Oh, I see a screen.
Okay, I can hear Jamie.
Oh, okay, then maybe I'm in here now.
I think we're up. Jamie, can you hear me?
So thank you.
Can she see the
That's what she said. She can see
PowerPoint
the screen.
presentation?
Okay, she's muted now though, so she can. Jamie, can you see the PowerPoint on your end?
I can't see a PowerPoint presentation.
What can you see?
No, I can only see a screen that says finance budget session number 1.
Okay.
Okay, so she's seeing the WebEx screen.
It says keeping Lori Wunsch's screen.
How do I expand this?
Okay, we're going to work on it for a second because we want to make sure that the public that's dialed in can see it as well.
Just go down to the PowerPoint and start the PowerPoint, and it'll show the screen. Just start it,
Now, can you see it, Jamie?
yeah.
Yes, I can.
Yay!
Okay, we are fixed. Back on track.
From current slide.
Thank you.
From current.
Okay, so we're good.
Does that say resume slideshow?
No, it says from current slide.
The second one is from current slide right there.
So now you get to do 2 PowerPoints.
Yeah.
I believe in you.
We're PowerPoint in Symphony.
Okay.
So, as I was saying, last year, our equalized value went up 8.76%. And our assessed valuation, of course, because each parcel had been revaluated by our local assessor, went up 11.57%. So this year now, you know, when the equalized value came out last year at 8.76%, it didn't seem like it was that out of sync, but then when you compare that to our assessed value, you can see that it was higher, and the state did tell our local assessor, our local assessor communicates with the DOR on a regular basis, that they did believe, based on that sales data, that even though he had just concluded his revaluation, that he was under fair market value. So this year now, they've obviously changed their mind. And now they have, basically, they decreased our equalized value by almost 2.5%. Our local assessor believes our assessed value is actually going to go up due to net new construction, about 1.5%. So we've got like opposite forces taking place where our assessed value is going up, but our equalized value is going down. So why do we really care about the equalized value? Well, and you know, one of the things that is a good marker that things are good around here is our net new construction. So our net new construction is about 2.8%. So we did have good construction this year. And, you know, net new construction is an important figure for us because it's used for levy limit purposes, and it's also used for expenditure restraint. So that is important for us. They still can't see it? Oh. Oh, I bet you we are.
Okay, we'll make a little adjustment to WebEx here.
No, that's his,
That's Liz.
Lori's to the left. Yeah, that's him.
Technology.
That's the screen.
stop sharing your screen so you can go back to the big screen?
You're muted. Unmute yourself to speak. Okay, try it again. There you go.
There.
Okay.
Did it work?
I think we're good. Let's see.
I think.
Okay, we believe that we have the audio back. Liz is on WebEx. Liz, can you hear us now in the council chamber? Or Jamie? Hold on, we'll unmute you.
Or we won't. Nobody will.
I don't want to mute myself again. Somebody's speaking, Jamie's speaking.
But she's muted.
So if you can stop sharing the screen and it'll make that big again, and then you can like unmute people.
Wait,
Oh, there it is.
Look at there.
Unmute. Up there.
There.
Okay, I think we have the audio fixed. Can our staff on WebEx hear us right now?
Yay, yes, they can.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, we're back. Audio's back, so we'll
Get away from there.
continue with our presentation.
Okay, so like I said, net new construction is important for our levy limit and expenditure restraint limitations. So what really created these changes in equalized value? When the state gives us our equalized value, they show us what the change is. So you can see that a lot of these changes really are corrections. So we had our starting equalized value of the $3.3 billion, and then they basically reduced our market value with a huge economic change, and all of that took place in commercial property. So $139 million economic change down, our net new construction of $99 million, and then corrections and other changes of another almost $40 million. And those were what brought our value down. And it's odd to me, and I, asked the DOR about this. You can see all of these corrections down for the overall city, but the change, the prior year corrections for the tax increment districts was actually an increase. And now that correction and the correction, the $21 million correction in our total value will come off our equalized value. So in 2022, that 21 million negative will be gone. So it will go up by 21 million. And the prior year corrections in our TIF districts will go down, will be eliminated. So our value in our TIF districts will go back down. And this is why I say I don't like revals, because it becomes kind of this roller coaster of equalized value till it settles down. And, I've lived through this basically through each revalve, but this, I have to say, is the worst we've ever experienced. So why does that make it hard for us to manage? The other thing, if you look at the county's equalized value went up 3%, but us being the largest value in the county went down 2.4%. So our share of the county pie got smaller, which means that everybody else is picking up more of the pie. And that's what we talk about when we talk about apportioning taxes. So last year, the city was 26% of the county's value. This year, we're 24%. So I expect, and of course I'm using their levy that they have on their draft budget, but with county apportionment, it's a little different because they take some of their levy out and that gets apportioned differently than just based on equalized value, the library and the bridge aid. So this is an estimate, but I'm expecting that our taxpayers in total will pay $180,000 less of the county's levy, and that's already with the increase that they have. So the total levy assessed to all of the city will be less than last year by 180, even though they're increasing their levy.
Wow.
It's better. The school district, last year, we were 61% of the Wausau School District's levy. This year, we're 58, so almost 3% reduction in that piece of pie. I'm expecting the levy reduction for the entire city population, what we're gonna levy to all of the parcels, to be about 1.8 less, because we have less of a burden due to that apportionment. NTC, same thing. Last year, we were 16.5% of NTC's budget. This year, we're gonna be 15%. So again, and they had their budget posted on their website, $365,000 less of the levy will have to be allocated to our taxpayers. DC Everest doesn't have their budget posted yet, but, you know, just using some estimates, I'm expecting, of course, DC Everest is a small section of the city, so this is gonna be a smaller number, but I'm expecting that levy to be down about 96,000. So when we look in total, you can see this about $2.4 million or $2.2 million of levy that our taxpayers won't pay in these jurisdictions because of that decrease in our equalized value. And then, of course, for the DC Everest, we take out the Wausau School District and put in the DC Everest, but it still is significant, even though it looks not significant because there's so few parcels in that district.
Michael, go ahead.
Okay, I just have a quick question, just
Yeah.
to make sure I'm understanding this. So, because our equalized value is reduced for this coming year, our taxpayers in the city of Wausau will have a lower burden when it comes to their county, school, and NTC tax.
Yes.
So they may see, I'm not going to say they're going to see a reduction in their tax bill, but there's going to be a percentage reduction as what it could have been if our equalized value was
Had kept pace, yes.
kept pace. Okay.
So then, if you look at our levy, remember how I said that the equalized value for our tax increment districts went up significantly. You know, the formula for a tax increment district is you take that increment value and you multiply it by the tax rate, and that's what you have to levy. So that increase really increased the need for the levy for the tax increment district. So in the budget, in the things that we have in the budget right now, our levy would go up about just shy of $2 million, which is about a 6.45% increase in the levy. And when you look, you know, that's a reasonably larger increase than prior years. But if you think about it, we said those other levies were going to go down by 2.2. So still we have taxpayers not actually receiving an additional burden. So if you ask, well, why is our levy going up 1.9 million and we still had this structural gap? That is because that $32 million correction that they did to the tax increment districts, and because of that law where you have to take your increment and multiply it by that tax rate, that's what you need to levy. So for the city of Wausau in 2021, our tax increment levy was the $3.1 million. This year, using the required computation by the state, it goes up to 4.2 million. So we have to increase our levy 1.1 million because of that correction, basically. And if there was any new growth, which there really wasn't any real new growth. So if we look at our levy change, our change for operations, our current year change from operations, the general levy is going from 27 million to 28 million, about an $830,000 change. So if we look at the last from 2016 to 2022, you can see it's actually a little less than average at this point. if you look at the same time period of what we typically have to increase our levy for the tax increment levy, the average during this exact same time period is $224,000. This year, we're having to increase it 1.1 million. So that's really what is causing this pressure in our budget. The other, I guess, nuance for this change in the tax increment value is, state law basically tells you that you can only create a new tax increment district or amend your tax increment district boundaries when your value is under 12%. So we were at 10% last year. We're at over 13% now. So we can amend a plan to change what we're going to spend money on, but there's only 2 unique situations where you can actually create a new district when you're over 12%. And when I called the state, because again, these swings are because of the adjustments to prior year, they're like, yeah, there's nothing in the law that really helps offset that in a specific year.
With a question on that, though, because if we're on this roller coaster, and next year, these adjustments are not part of this computation, we should then drop below the 13% again, correct?
One would hope, yes.
Yes, so we'd be closer in line with where we want to be.
Right.
Okay.
So if we look at our levy utilization, obviously the general fund is the biggest user, about 20 million. The next one is our tax increment districts and debt service. Those are the next biggest, and Metro Ride follows at just under $1 million. If we look at the changes, you can see that in all areas, other areas in the other funds, we have, small changes as far as dollar value in the funds, that the 2 changes, 696,000 in the general fund, again, that 1.1 million in the tax increment district, and that's how we're coming up with our 1.9 million. Again, as I said, the general fund relies heavily on property taxes because we don't have a lot of revenue diversification, and because every year when prices go up and our revenues don't keep pace with that, basically the property taxes has to shoulder the burden of the increase in costs. And here, if we look at the revenues as far as a change from 21 to 22, it's very evident. We are getting a small increase in our transportation aids. That's what is attributed to the $161,000 of new or increase in grant and aids. But otherwise, you can see that all the other revenues are, just barely contributing just a little bit. And so, as I said, property tax has to carry the burden for those increases. And this is kind of where you can see.
Marianne, can
yeah.
I ask you a question? Look, on the previous one, what could miscellaneous revenue?
Oh, that's a good question. Thank you. That is our investment income. It's investment income, rent, but investment income really drove that reduction. And again, you can see when we look at all the way back to 2013, our shared revenues has basically remained the same since 2013. The only place that we have seen a little bit of growth is in expenditure restraint and, again, in transportation aids. And really this year, we're actually seeing just a tiny decrease in shared revenues, tiny decrease in expenditure restraint, but we are getting a little increase in the transportation aids. So expenditure restraint, the state passed legislation a number of years ago to try to control the growth of property taxes. And so there's two mechanisms that they do that. One is the levy limit, and the other is the expenditure restraint. So right now, using the expenditure restraint formula, our allowable increase in our expenses, we would be able to increase 1.8 million. We've utilized about 1 million of that, so, basically, we have $845,000 that by law, we would be able to increase our expenses. And that 1 million does not include the 562,000 that we took out to close the gap. So if we were gonna, restore all of the department's non-operating requests, that would, bring that down to less than a $200,000 space for the expenditure restraint. From an expenditure standpoint, our services are, where we spend our money. If, police, public works, fire, refuse, parks, general government at 12%, generally I think a person would think that, just slightly over 10% for your administrative costs would not be a horrible thing. And again, we are a service organization. We rely on our people to provide services to our taxpayers, and that is very evident when you look at expenditure by category at almost 71% of our operating budget being consumed by that personnel budget. And the second is contractual services. If we look at that contractual services line item, you can see that a big portion of that we're basically paying ourselves. The motor pool is 70%, so we're taking the money, billing it to the departments, and putting it in that motor pool to maintain and replace the rolling stock. Utilities are about 13%, refuse collection 13%, and CCITC about 12%. And again, just like when we look at the expenses, our personnel are focused on those areas that we're providing services to our taxpayers as well. This budget has no new positions in it. And here's a summary of the department's budgets, comparing their 2021 adopted budget, so not their modified budget, if they, added some additional spending. This is the budget that was adopted, as well as what we actually spent in 2020 by each department. So you can see, again, we're increasing about $866,000, a 2.3% increase in our expenses. But as I said, this doesn't have, some of the things that we want to evaluate. We covered this when we went through the PowerPoint of our year end, that we did have a good year last year, and we are on target to have a good year again this year. Again, we always knock on wood, make sure, because we don't want December to, change that. And of course, I don't like to see rising gas prices either, so. Outside of our general fund, we do have some activities, community development funds. They rely heavily on state aids and their revolving loan funds as their sources of revenues. They do get some property tax revenues, about $276,000 this year. The only other fund that relies, as a special revenue fund that relies on property taxes, is our recycling fund. I heard at SISM, they were talking about, the multiple trips that they take around the city to clean up leaves, to make people happy. And we have seen, obviously, increases in our costs because we are expending more effort on that area. So this is an area that has been growing, and that we've been trying to make budget corrections, because we just can't seem to, every year we think, oh, now we've got it, and we still need more money for it. And again, most of it is our internal staff and the motor pool. So it's not as if you're expending a lot of money outside the organization.
And I think that's an important message because we did talk about the difficulties with figuring out what's going to happen with leaf pickup and the logistics of doing it too early and too late. And I think it's important for people to remember that, yes, it's a service that people appreciate, but it also helps us comply with stormwater mandates. And that's the primary reason we pick up leaves. It's super convenient and, people, sometimes get mad if it happens too early or too late or not often enough. But at the end of the day, it really is about stormwater management. And, the cost of that going up for convenience, if it keeps going further and further and further, is certainly something we have to talk about. Because we certainly can't let that get to the point where, we're spending $1 million to pick up leaves. I mean, we're getting there, so.
Mary Ann, I have
Yeah.
a question. I know in one area you had put down about garbage collection and then on recycling. So I guess I was looking at it as being the contracts with Harders.
Yep.
So-
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
So could you explain that a little bit better?
Sure, so the refuse line item is all the Harder's contract for curbside garbage pickup. But we have to track those costs separately because the recycling activity is a grant-funded program. And so we put that in a special revenue fund, many, many, many years ago. That, the recycling fund basically tracks all costs that are eligible for the recycling program, the state recycling program. So that would include the curbside pickup of recycling, but it also would include leaf pickup and the yard waste site, because those are state eligible for that grant. So we're isolating all of the eligible costs for that grant, and that's why they're accumulated in that fund.
Okay. Another question about the 400 block fund.
Yes.
I guess I had, in talking to one of the alders that was at the park meeting, I guess there was an indication of
Yeah, there was
looking at more details about park staff that are being used for Wausau events and that. So is those dollars or those hours in their individual department budgets, or is it included here in the 400
Yeah,
block?
there was a lot of misinformation provided at that meeting. I only was able to watch like 4 minutes of it, and I was like, oh my God. So I am actually working on a memo that I will send out to council to try to straighten out all of the misinformation that was
Okay.
presented. But when you look at that 400 block fund, when the 400 block was constructed, obviously we got feedback from the Parks Department of the increase in workload. And then, obviously when the riverfront was unveiled, that increased their workload as well. And so basically, the council at the time, or I should say finance committee, agreed to allow the Parks Department to allocate the new position that they created to maintain the 400 block, as well as costs like, let's say, the fountain, the water for the fountain. Those types of costs are basically funded out of room tax. And then out of the room tax budget, also we transfer every year. So the park staff, about just shy of $90,000 is funded out of room tax directly. So they're billing that fund directly. And then we transfer just under $150,000 a year into the general fund. And that too has been kind of a long-standing transfer, acknowledging the event activity that the city staff, support.
So I think that's important also to recognize, especially for people that follow this at home, is that when we fund those activities to maintain venues that draw tourism and draw events, funding that out of room tax, which is actual tourism dollars, so tourism dollars going back into tourism, that protects the average property taxpayer from having to bear those costs. So that's big for us.
Yep, and if you recall, really, room tax for us is now frozen at about $444,000 a year. The rest of it goes to the Room Tax Commission for disbursement. So, and I guess the city developed what we call our continuing appropriation people years and years ago, back when there was another Rosenberg around. So we've continued on with that all these years, so, because it was such a good idea. And so this is basically the 444,000 really isn't changing from year to year anymore. So capital projects right now is sitting at $9.6 million. 3.3 of that is for infrastructure. 105 of it is for facilities. The fleet facility phase 1 of 1.1 million, transit of 1.4 million, fire equipment of 67,000, the ERP and some small other little projects of 1.9, airport of 1.1, and park and rec of 408. And if we look, obviously, we are fortunate that some of those are grant funded. The airport door replacement is 90% funded by the FAA. The airport terminal upgrade will most likely be funded by FAA funding. Transit has state funds and carryover to fund theirs. And then the fire equipment received a AFG grant of $30,000, and so those are funded. And then just to provide additional detail, parks includes the athletic park, big screen, scoreboard, tennis courts, drinking fountains, and their rolling stock replacement. For facilities, we're looking at $75,000 to fence in the police department's parking lot, and then DPW office remodel of $30,000. Besides the ERP, which was the 1.6 million, there's other equipment that needs to be maintained in CCITC of 234. And then, like I said, the DPW facility phase 1 of 1.1 million.
Okay, and then for clarity, these are the projects that the CIP committee in July ranked and scored from a long list of requests, and these are the ones that emerged to the top. They don't rank infrastructure and rolling stock, but they did rank stuff like this.
Yep.
Based on need and whether or not it had either contractual promises or other funding, so.
When we look at the infrastructure budget, you can see, again, a big portion of that, the largest portion is related to street improvements of about 1.3 million, followed by the DOT project of 550,000. But again, all of this is within the engineering control, I guess, not decision-making, but, they manage the projects. And when we look at the infrastructure, 6th Street, there's 550,000, that is a DOT project for asphalt overlay. 4th Avenue, just under 600,000. Bugby just under, or a little over 600,000. And then 4th Street, which is a smaller project of 113,000. We look at our infrastructure, and it is an important, service that we provide and something that we, need to continue to invest in because, streets decline over time. The other thing, I was at a finance director's WebEx, and, there was a lot of comments from finance directors throughout the state that their state aids for transportation were going down, and it's really the formula that the state uses is the last 6 years of your expenses. So if we're not investing in our streets, our transportation aids go down. And if we're not we may think we're investing, but if we're not investing at the same level that other communities are, then our transportation aids go down. So, we have been fortunate the last few years with Thomas Street, Town Line, First Ave, some of those projects that we have going on. And of course, the mall project will, be an eligible street project. So,
Well, and I think we've really been fortunate on that infrastructure side as well, because, we, in the last couple of budgets, often road projects were the first things, when we needed to cut to keep the mill rate under control. One of the first things that always got cut, at least early on in my tenure, was road projects. Let's just not do one street, or let's not do two streets. And it was easy to say that until you end up with a backlog. Right now, the city is sitting with a backlog of about $96 million worth of road projects that need done. And it is my prayer about daily that the federal government will pass this infrastructure bill that will get us money for roads and bridges and airports and everything else we need, that they'll find a way to reach across the aisle, because we have shovel-ready projects where at the local level, we could make huge strides to do projects that people can see and feel every day, and we're waiting on them. So this is just a smattering. I mean, in the last couple budgets, we have not cut road projects, and we've not gone to that solution. Even though it's been difficult, we've maintained and not cut the projects that CISM picked, and that's helped us, I think, over the last couple.
And I think that listening to the CISM meeting was one of the concerns that I had too, because I guess I had, in my mind, hoped that if that infrastructure project was funded through the federal government, that our DPW facility would be something that we would be able to submit. And, with the struggle on where it should be placed, it makes me less convinced that that would be considered shovel-ready, because we don't have even a site picked out.
Right, and so
And-
it's our goal, though, in CISM to finish the feasibility study, narrow the list, and not take 6 months to come up with some ideas. So, at the rate they're going in Washington, hopefully we can still stay ahead of it. When the consultant comes back with the data, the committee will certainly prioritize making up its mind and not dragging its feet. So,
And obviously relocation is going to increase its costs significantly, but
by multiples, yes. Yes.
So we started, and if you kind of noticed when we were going through, really there was that small equipment request from the fire department. And one of the reasons you don't see a lot of equipment is because we started this central equipment fund back in 2016. We've been trying to build the fund every year, little by little, so that departments can use this for different regular replacements that they have needs for without having to compete in the CIP process. So last year, I put $20,000 in for transportation and streets. Public Works is using much of that dollars for survey-related equipment and GIS. So we increased that by $10,000 this year. And then the police department also got a little bit more, but that went up just about $25,000.
Well, and this fund is huge for us, because before, we had all kinds of competing CIP requests, and it was for critical safety gear, and it was for things like, things that they have to get the job done that they know has a shelf life. So if you know in the fire department that breathing apparatus has a 15-year shelf life, and you start to squirrel away a little bit after you buy it, the funds are just there the next time you need it, and you don't have to compete with things like concrete repairs and, telephone systems and things like, financial software. I mean, those things shouldn't have to compete. So this fund has been huge for them.
And then our tax increment districts, we have several districts now that are more in the final retirement phase. So we're seeing a lot of decrease in activity in the tax increment districts, as well as improved cash flow. So this year, you can see in TID 3, a 7% increase in the equalized value. Almost all of that is related to the prior year correction of just under $6 million. It has about $16 million of debt outstanding. The budget has administrative costs of $35,000 and debt payments. That's all that's in the budget this year. And when you look at the cash flow, you can see that we are seeing improvement in the cash flow over the next few years. Tax increment district number 6, this district's expenditure period is closed. Again, it saw a 12% increase in its equalized value, and all of that was this prior year correction. That prior year correction in this district was about $13 million. Here again, we're paying debt of $2.8 million. That's principal and interest. Its outstanding debt is $10 million and a small administrative charge of $4,000. That's all that's in the budget for that. And here again, you're seeing, a turnaround in cash flow. 2021, we had one small blip, but nothing to be concerned about. TID 7, debt is nearly paid off, $80,000 at the end of this year. Again, it basically just retiring debt, $4,000 of administrative costs. Its debt expenses $56, and it will be transferring, I would expect about $30,000 to TID 12 as was approved. Here we saw a 24% increase in equalized value, and the prior year correction was $5.3 million. This did actually experience increase in its value, real increase due to the Surgical Associates building coming online. And then just projecting where this district is, we had approved for it to allocate increment to TID 7. Again, looking at what the need is, we can, stop allocating pretty much at any time. We would have to do it before May so that it's reported to the state in time for them to do their equalized value report, but that's the only thing we would need to do. TID 8 has about $4.2 million outstanding. This district has a few developer payments that it's making. The apartment building off of 17th Avenue, the hotel, as well as Sherrill Tire. And then it's got administrative costs of $18,000 and debt payments of $702. This one also saw a large increase in equalized value, a 53% increase in equalized value. Again, some of that has to do with new construction, but some of it also has to do with the prior year correction of $2.6 million. This is going to experience a little uptick in its deficits, but they will remain relatively stable. TID 9 is the brewery. Again, small debt outstanding, $120,000. It's only retiring debt right now, $2,000 of administrative expenses, a debt payment of $62,000. It actually experienced a decrease in equalized value of, that is related to its prior year correction. And here, this has always kind of maintained a small deficit, but you can tell that, it's manageable.
Now, Mary Ann, could you refresh my memory on this? I thought the Bull Falls was behind in some things
They're-
with the city.
Yeah, they're behind in their loan payments.
But current on taxes.
Right.
Okay.
That's my understanding, yeah. TID 10 is out in the business campus. It has $1,090,000 of outstanding debt, administration of $3,000, debt payments of $143,000. It's prepping for the Stewart Avenue construction project coming up in 2024. It had a small increase in equalized value of 3% and a prior year correction of 1.2. When I look at the cash flows, we will be able to do that Stewart Avenue project without having to borrow all of the money and still maintain a positive cash flow in the district. So that is great news for that district, yeah. Tax increment district number 11, this is where Great Lakes Cheese and Wausau Chemical, we have outstanding debt of $10,265,000. Our Great Lakes Cheese developer payment is about $785,000. We have $350,000 for capital outlay for pedestrian walkway type activity. a debt payment of $1,018,000, administrative costs of $16,000. Here again, the equalized value went up 6%. Much of that was related to that prior year correction. And this district, again, has just a small little deficit that it's managing. Tax increment District 12, this is our most recent one, 5.9 of outstanding debt. Mac and Don is $12,000 developer payment. Obviously, we committed to $3.5 million to WAS. They drew down about $1.1 million this year. That's what it costs to tear down the building itself. Obviously, Penny still needs to be torn down. The slab needs to be removed, and the home furniture facade needs to be repaired. So they'll be, most likely drawing down money next year in the 2022 budget. So we've budgeted for that for 2022.
I guess, Marianne, I thought Penny's parking was going to continue.
It is, just the building would be torn down.
Okay. Is there plans in the budget then from seeing the county courthouse, parking ramp there? Isn't there on the north side there that needs to be
Fixed, yeah.
fixed?
Yes, there's some dollars, parking improvements of about $120,000 to do some, engineering and architectural study on what would need to be done. And then utilities, extension of 310 and street work of 2.3, and debt payments of $121,000. This saw actually a small increase of 2% in its equalized value, and again, another prior year correction of $500,000. This also will sustain a deficit for a short period of time. Debt service, we're going to be retiring $10.4 million of principal in the 2022 budget and $1.8 million of interest. We have a stable levy of $4 million, and the rest of it is funded by transfers from the tax increment districts. Just kind of, again, looking at the composition of the debt outstanding, about 37% of that debt is related to just our annual street projects, and the rest is related to the tax increment districts. And we've been looking at our existing debt outstanding. You can see that, we do have a rapid retirement schedule. That's the light blue. And then the beige would be our typical annual capital plan of $3 million. Obviously, a large project like fleet, thank you, gosh, the fleet facility and other, unexpected projects would change that. And then our internal service funds, basically, again, like we said, they're there to accumulate costs and then allocate those costs back to the individual departments. Our internal service funds are our insurance fund that covers workers' comp, property, and other types of business risk, our motor pool fund, and our employee benefits fund. Our enterprise funds, Metro Ride, about $3.6 million. Again, they have a stable levy of $889,000. Wausau Downtown Airport, $160,000 on the levy and $470 of expenses. The parking fund, $833,000 of expenses and $155,000 of the levy. Animal control, $233,000 worth of expenses and a levy of $60,000. So that basically covers a high-level look at the budget. The things that I thought maybe we would want to talk about at the next meeting is for us to really dive further into that capital plan and look at how we want to finance that capital plan and what the impact of that capital plan would be on debt, and what other funding options we might have. In conjunction with that, we'd like to really sit down and look at our transit. As I said, we right now are showing a level levy of $889,000. They received some pretty significant CARES funds, and so there is some flexibility for us to do some different things with that transit levy, and so we'd like to go through some options with you at the next meeting on that. We'd also like to, hear, well, what kind of strategy should we look, do you think someone wants to talk?
Somebody dialed, just
Oh,
disconnected.
Yeah.
okay. Look at the strategies for how you want to evaluate the supplemental requests and kind of develop a framework of how we want to do that. And we can have a list of those. We'll try to get these things out in advance. And then if I have any updates on the other taxing districts and their levy. Now, the schools are by law required to send us what their levy, like what our related levy is by November 1. So next week is probably early yet, but like I said, they're all posting, if, DCFS hadn't posted their budget yet, so I'm continually looking to see if there's more information for me. I did reach out to them too. And then kind of seeing, well, what would it look like to a taxpayer if, as we show right now, our estimate is those taxing jurisdictions, that total levy is going to go down by about 2.2 million. If we use that in our budget, what would that look like for a taxpayer? So I thought we could talk about that. And then any other areas of interest that you guys have that you'd like us to put on the agenda for the next meeting?
Does anyone have any other items that we'd like to talk through with regard to the development of the budget next time? I think,
Well, I guess I'm concerned that we kind of didn't discuss that as part of our prior decision-making in the last few months is not the Harder's costs per property. Isn't that going to a flat rate
no,
instead of being on the levy?
No.
no, we would have to vote separately to create a flat fee for that too.
Okay, I thought we
got rid of the referendum requirement, but we've not taken any action. So garbage is still paid for. People still pay for their garbage based on the value of their home, regardless of how much or how little garbage they create. And so that's been for a long time, but we maybe can solve that in the future. With regard to our budget process, I guess I expect, seeing that the non-personnel reductions in the core budget are what they are, if the departments bring those back as supplements as well as new initiatives, I expect that we'll see a decent amount of supplements, more than we've seen in the past couple years. Typically, what we do is we have the department head present on those. We are allowed to ask questions about them, and then we rank and score them like we do CIP. So we can try to kind of prioritize based on needs and contractual obligations and, mandates and situations that are, that we have to manage with some urgency. So, I think that if we can certainly talk about that process, but I'm a fan of that process because it's public facing. It lets them tell their story about their needs to us and the community, and it lets us fairly rank and score them based on what the true need is. So that process, I think, has major value for us, regardless of what boils to the top. Mayor?
Yeah, I like that process too, but I also think it gives us an opportunity to think about our ARPA funds in a different way. If there are some ideas, we could parking lot that for the ARPA discussion too. It helps us kind of think more broadly about what we have access to.
Definitely, and knowing that we have ARPA funds that are waiting, if they have ideas where that is a potential fund source, that can help us decide if we're going to fund them now or wait a little bit, once we have some direction on what we're going to do with those funds. Or if we decide that we want to earmark some of those funds as we go along, if the ideas are, emerging with enough interest that we want to start to spend some ARPA, we have that option as well.
Yeah, I know in attending the league finance directors meeting, a lot of cities are using ARPA in their budget, looking at their capital plan and seeing if there are any things in the capital plan that would qualify for the ARPA funds. I know the county administrator made recommendations in the county's budget of things that he felt was appropriate for using the ARPA funds. And boy, Madison filled a massive budget shortfall with ARPA, like $14 million this year.
I don't know if I love that process.
Well, I know,
But yeah,
but I mean, I'm just using that example. There are a lot of examples where departments or communities are starting to use their ARPA to help with their capital plans. And so, certainly, we could look at that too.
Yeah, I don't have a problem using ARPA for some relevant expenses. I certainly don't want to see us burn through it all, though, because, we've had a lot of discussions about big public projects that we'd like to use it for as well. And I know the Water Commission has some ideas, and, those things coming forward for next year, that's huge for us, so.
And we could talk about that too, because some communities have basically taken their ARPA funds and said, okay, we're going to say 70, this was shared at at my finance meeting, 75% of our ARPA is going to be used by the city and 25 is going to be used for programming outside by, for individuals or whatever. And some communities, obviously, in the ARPA rules, your lost revenue had more flexibility of how you could use your ARPA money. And for this last year, our lost revenue computation came to just a little bit over 2 million. So basically, we can use that for any government purpose then. So, that might be another method of targeting what you think you want to use, let's say, in the capital plan or for the operating budget, is that lost revenue component. That would be another measurement of what would be reasonable, I guess.
Yes, and I think that's an important discussion for us to have. I just personally, as one member, am a big fan of using ARPA funding for things that people can see, feel, and appreciate. I mean, at the end of the day, federal dollars are all their dollars as well. And so, if there are initiatives where, we can fill some of that budget hole, but I also don't want to see us just absorb it like a sponge into our operational type things and have people wonder, where did that $15 million go? When there may be a possibility that, let's say, we could, spend a few million and, attack this lead pipe issue that we keep talking about. I mean, there's other things that we can look for. So I think diversifying that use is huge, and that's a good conversation for us to have. So it looks like we'll have a full agenda with trying to strategize this at our next meeting, but we will also have 2 next week, so we'll see each other a lot. And then we can start to delve into the meat of that. As far as supplemental requests, if we decide what format we want them in next week, the first meeting, do we want the presentations at the second one? I mean, are the departments ready at that point?
Yeah, or we could, I was thinking because the November 9th meeting is shortly after that, or the October 26th finance meeting, is the following Tuesday. So if you wanted to have a little bit of a break in between to do the supplementals, we could do it at that October 26th meeting.
I do feel like,
too.
because we have to allow them time to rank and score, I do feel like,
The members?
well, yes, us. And I do feel like if our public hearing is the 9th, we need to be pretty much done by the end of October. So I think it's important for us to stay on schedule, because if we have some push and pull with what supplements we want, and then we have, numbers coming in late from the other taxing jurisdictions, and then we have to adjust to get the right mill rate, I want to make sure we have enough time to do that, and I don't want to burn up right to November 8th and then go to public hearings. So if the departments could be ready with their supplements for the end of next week, for that second meeting?
I think they would be, they were.
I think they're ready. No, I want to agree with you. I think they're ready.
Yeah,
We've had
the
these
only one we
conversations.
don't have costed out yet is the, this step compression, or shortening the steps.
Right.
Oh, 'cause we just
So
need that policy.
that was gonna be a supplemental request, so, we have an estimate, we just don't have, the allocation of what's gonna be levy, what's gonna not be levy, and,
Sure.
we need to fine tune it a little bit, but we were gonna work on that. So I think we absolutely could hand out the supplemental requests,
you know.
Right,
On-
we'll determine the format, is it Tuesday and Thursday, I think?
It's
Yeah.
Wednesday, Thursday.
Wednesday, Thursday, okay. So if we can distill out the format Wednesday, if they can at least tentatively plan on their calendars to be ready for us Thursday night.
Okay.
And then we can probably take the weekend to do the scoring.
And then
Get that
have it
stuff
ready on
back to you,
Tuesday.
yes, and then we can just keep ourselves moving.
Okay.
So that we're not stalled, so.
I guess I would be interested in having a report by department of what positions have been vacant and unfilled and budget-wise, and then the rest of their expenditures by department, because at the same time, we could be looking at what could be surplus for this year or tending to be that, and do we want to go ahead and maybe handle some of those earmarked budget and do it this year?
Right. So in your packet was a listing by department, and it does show what their estimated actual is. I do, it was a little small print, so I did print out a legal size, if someone wants a legal size one, so you can see it a little bit better.
I think that's helpful, especially if we know, the one thing we don't want to do is take the vacancy funding and allocate it to other things, because that forces them to delay hiring. And if they have intent and candidates or recruitment going on, and they're intending to fill those positions in real time, we can't pull the rug out from under that. But if they know that they either maybe don't need the position anymore, or that they're, something's held open and unfilled, and there's, a need to assess the size of the workforce, that's totally different.
And I think the other thing, we don't budget for sick leave payout. And so that vacancy rate, even, like you might have someone who just quits, but that vacancy then helps pay for that sick leave when somebody retires.
Retires, yep.
And if you recall, 2 years ago, the fire department was way over budget
Oh,
because
my,
they had
yeah.
so many retirements that year.
Yep.
Obviously, we still had a profit or a surplus, I shouldn't call it surplus, all, in total.
Well,
but-
luckily, we had those funds to use, because that was a huge responsibility
Yeah.
that you really can't predict with super accuracy, so.
Well, I guess for me, I may be the only one, but I wanted to see it by each position or within the department, and showing how much is at the September 30th, and to see what we have.
Oh, we can print that out. So we can give you a list of vacancies and then just their line item budget as of September 30th? Is that what you're asking
Well,
for?
send me something so I know.
Okay.
But I just feel like this is a good time to be looking at the surplus. And the budget, we have the money for the current year budget. But
Right.
we could be looking at potential savings through the 9 months as a way to maybe do some things this year instead of waiting.
I see.
Okay. Thank you. Certainly. So, yep, we'll get that out, and then we will then reconvene about this subject on Wednesday, on the 20th, and we'll be ready to go through these topics, and then hopefully get our presentations on Thursday. So, anybody have anything else about tonight's presentation? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I guess I had, are we going to be looking at maybe revenue increases? And then at what point we'll be looking at future contracts where the daily late on the project status will be
Oh.
upped?
So in SISM.
Major-
yes, so
major up.
We'll talk about that. So that's a SISM topic that's coming, and it really pertains to liquidated damages. So when a contractor is late with the work, and there's no legitimate, like, weather or supply chain issue that has caused the late work. So as an example, this year we have Third Avenue that's been a nightmare since April. They were supposed to be done August 9th. They just put the first layer of asphalt on this week in October. And so that contractor is amassing penalties by the day. Contract allows for $1,000 a day. Most other entities that these people work for find them in the thousands per day. And that's why they'll leave our project sit and they'll go work on a DOT project, because the penalties are worse. But the assessment of those penalties is up to the Board of Public Works. And so they get to decide if the contractor gets an extension, and they get to decide if he or she gets penalties. So SISM has talked about maybe upping those contractual damages. They don't apply very often. So it's not often that you have a situation, only a few times have we had a contractor that's been remiss enough to really earn these penalties like we have on Third Ave. We had some in District 8 a number of years ago where they left people sit for a month. But almost always, there's a legitimate reason for a delay, and they don't get penalties real often, so it's not a huge budget impact. And the money they get from it is supposed to cover our extra cost of our people being out there managing the project longer than they should have been. So, yes, we'll talk about that in SISM, but I don't think it's gonna have a huge budget bearing, because the contractors have to basically be remiss in their duties to even have that happen in the first place. So most of them are really good and they finish on time, and if they don't, there's a good reason. But every once in a while, you get one like this, so. But yes, we'll definitely add that, talk about that in SISM during the off-season, because construction is finally wrapping up, so. With no other topics, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Watson, second by Herbst. Members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Aye, opposed? None are opposed, so that motion carries. We'll stand adjourned, and I will see all of you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.